He wants to be Attorney General. He's here tonight.
The Dan York State of Mind program is brought to you in part by Lookout Rhode Island and Takeo Comfort Solutions.
Peter Neronha is the former U.S. attorney. A handful of months ago, the Trump administration said goodbye to him and a whole bunch of Obama appointees. Not so sure that was the wisest thing to do without a plethora of folks to replace, although I'm confident that our federal office here is still running smoothly, mostly probably on the notes that he left. But now Peter Neronha has decided that he still wants to stay in the game of law enforcement, which around here is, well, it might be a game to you. It's not a game to him, hasn't been a game to law enforcement necessarily, but public corruption has been kind of on the top of the list of his concerns in the U.S. Attorney's Office and may very well be as the State Attorney General. It's great to have you aboard. Thanks very much for tuning in to my State of Mind this evening. So let's get into it. We have a lot to talk about with Peter. He was kind enough to join us on the radio yesterday, weekdays 3 to 6, of course, on WPRO. Here was the headline and the scene from the announcement yesterday in hometown Jamestown.
Peter Neronha is looking to extend his lifelong career as a prosecutor.
I'm running because when Donald Trump told me in March that my work for the people of Rhode Island was over, Shelley and I decided that it wasn't.
Neronha touched the raw Rhode Island nerve of public corruption early in a speech.
Now, I wish it were otherwise, but it's inevitable that there will be more public corruption work to do, and I'm ready to do it.
As U.S. Attorney, Neronha put politicians like former House Speaker Gordon Fox and former House Finance Chairman Raymond Gallison behind bars. Neronha also focused on battling the opioid crisis, sex trafficking, and combating violent crime.
Build a good team in the office, build a good team with the state police. That's why I think the relationship between the state police and the AG's office has to be very, very strong.
Among those in attendance, current and former law enforcement officials, including 2 prior heads of the state police, as well as the chief of the Woonsocket Police Department.
He's a great supporter of police officers in general, but he also has the other side where he's compassionate.
He's an exceptional person. He's ethically sound.
You know, that's, of course, the former superintendent of the state police, Stephen O'Donnell there. Welcome. Thanks for joining us. Congratulations on your decision to run for office. It's always a process, right?
It is. Yeah, it sure is. My wife and myself and our kids thought about that for a while. And even after, you know, we got the green light at home, I wanted to make sure it was right. And so over the last several months, I've really been talking to a lot of folks around the state and thinking about it a lot at home. And this is the right move for me, I think.
Talking to folks around the state, what does that mean? Everybody says that.
Yeah.
I don't view you as a typical politician.
Yeah.
So what does that mean?
Yeah. So
talking
like
about what?
Yeah. So I sat with the Civil Rights Roundtable, for example, a couple of weeks ago, and the Journal reported on that. It wasn't set up to be a Journal report. The reporter just came by, but you know, how can the Attorney General's office serve communities of color, and do I have in their minds the kind of partnership building skills to do it? I think I do. I want to hear it from them. You know, I wanted to hear also what people want from their Attorney General. You know, you sit with someone from the LGBT community and they say, well, look, you know, we're not tracking hate crimes in this state. And I knew that because when I was U.S. Attorney, I would get the data coming out of the Justice Department where, you know, you had 3 hate crimes in Rhode Island in the past year. I knew we had more than that because some of them I knew about. You know, spray painting the Islamic school down in West Warwick. So, you know, what ways could the Attorney General's office, you know, help with that problem? Talking to folks in business, talking to law enforcement, you know, just trying to get a sense of where the AG's office could be helpful and how I could help, you know, given my own background. And as I went through that process, and again, you know, continue to talk at home and just think to myself, I just felt like I could make a contribution here. And if I was going to run for any public office, the Attorney General's office was the office I was going to run for, because if I can make a contribution anywhere, I think it's there.
Well, it's where you grew up professionally.
It is. It's the work I've been doing for 20 years.
You know what's interesting about your announcement yesterday? It was chock full of law enforcement personnel, which I think is testimony to the industry. You're highly respected. It wasn't full of politicians.
Yeah, well,
and we don't see. We had a very funny moment when Charlie Lombardi, the mayor of North Providence, called the radio show yesterday. Actually, while Peter was in, and I said, "Hey, can you wait, Mayor?" And he came on, and in Charlie's unique fashion, offered an endorsement of the Attorney General. But I take notice that law enforcement thinks this is awesome. I don't have a sense that there's a big political hurrah going on here.
You know, I can't speak to whether there is or there isn't.
You're running as a Democrat.
Absolutely,
Right.
yes. But you know, I'm just trying to focus on what I can bring to the table. It's 20 years of experience. I try to call the cases. I like to think I always try to call them as I saw them. That's what I feel confident that I did. And I'm hoping that the people of Rhode Island will see that and support me when the time comes.
I said yesterday, and I believe this, that the timing is smart for you to have announced now. I mean, the election is not until, if there's a primary, it would be September of next year. The general election obviously is November. So you may have cleared the deck of any viable competition. Who knows? It's an open democracy. But I didn't really even talk to you about this yesterday. It dawned on me that last night and today that there wasn't a lot of political support. And I just wonder if that is coincidental, or is that a message that you've roughed up too many?
Oh, I don't know. I don't know. I mean,
did you think about it?
No. I mean, look. Here's my reaction. And I said that to someone today. I wanted to call a few people today and thank them for coming. What I saw out there was a pretty broad base of people who reflect my life. I mean, there's an old friend of mine who I worked with in private practice, who's now the #2 person in the Middlesex County DA's office, who drove down for that. I saw the guy who coached me in softball 40 years ago when I was playing on a softball team in college. I saw ministers from Providence that I worked with. The minister from the Calvary Baptist Church came down. I saw old timers who spent time with my dad. Law enforcement. It was sort of a variety of segments of my life. My own minister was there. So, those are the kinds of people I hope I appeal to in Rhode Island. Regular people, who are looking for an attorney general that will do the people's work, go in there, do the right thing, call the cases the way they need to be called. And I hope that message resonates.
Well, I think it's really interesting because you said yesterday on the radio that you may count 5 close friends in your life. And I think that's authentic. There's not a lot of hyperbole with you. I think if we all do a real count, you determine what your own number is. But in the political world, you haven't invested in making friends. In the prosecutorial role that you have played and in the Attorney General's role, you haven't had to and probably are inclined to. It might not even be your nature to engage in the political environment on a regular social basis, right?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think like a lot of, families where both parents work, you work, you have kids to raise, we have 2 boys, you go home, you raise them, we're a partner, my wife works hard, she's a primary care doctor, so, there wasn't a lot of bandwidth for doing that kind of stuff in the first place, but I also felt, as U.S. Attorney, and then certainly when I was on the line, I mean, my job was to do the cases, and as U.S. Attorney was to be out of the fray as much as possible. The Attorney General's office, for better or worse, there's the political path is how you have to get there. I'm going to be out more in the next year or so. But that doesn't change my inner philosophy or my compass, which is do the job the way it needs to be done.
I guess last question on this, and we'll dovetail into some of this corruption stuff, which is an important conversation to have. Did you bust too many pals to be a fan favorite of the political community?
No, I don't know. I think most public officials are doing the right thing. They probably feel as bad when one of these handful of people kind of go off the rails as anybody else. It makes them look bad, right? I mean, it happens. I don't know that. I don't want to assume that. I like to think that most people, whether they're elected officials or not, hopefully see the right thing being done and applaud it.
All right. When we come back, we'll talk a little bit more about the culture in the state, which is, one of the primary conversations in this campaign, no doubt. Stay with us.
Regret not asking more questions at the time about that bill?
Well, right now, What If 38 Studios was a great success, and you might be asking me a different question. So I can't hypothesize as to what I would have or would not have said back then.
That's the now Attorney General, who is responding to a question as to whether he should have asked more questions back in the day when he was a state rep, had just left leadership, was a rank and file member of the General Assembly, representing Pawtucket, and he, like the other lemmings in the legislature, voted yes on enabling legislation that created the vacuum, or the opportunity, really, for 38 studios. As U.S. Attorney, you studied this extensively.
Yeah, we looked at 38.
You didn't bring any charges.
Correct.
Remind this audience why that was the case.
Yeah, so we looked at violations of federal law. You know, that's obviously what the U.S. Attorney's Office enforces. And so, you know, in all the cases we've done, obviously that's what we do. We sit down, we see what we have, and we see whether we can bring anything or not. And so we were looking for, you know, violations of the bank fraud statutes, for example, and you know, really, you know, any corruption case, any white collar case, it comes down to two things. You know, you follow the lies and you follow the money. Well, the money here was pretty easy to follow. The question was, where were the lies? Who got lied to? You know, did Bank Rhode Island get lied to when they made the loans to Schilling? And what we found, and then we made this public at the time, was that, and I'm talking about the contingent fee credits. I mean, you know, we were asking, well, you know, did the bank know those fee credits were contingent? Because you might think that, well, if they're contingent, why would you give a loan based on that? And what we found, you know, at the end of the day, was that the bank knew it. So, you know, you've got to find the lie. You follow the money, you got to find the lies, and we didn't find it. And so, but I will say that it wasn't like, you know, we did a lot of work, public corruption work, after we completed our review of that with the FBI. And every time we had another corruption case with a player, you know, Speaker Fox is one, House Finance Chair Gallison's another, we always asked ourselves, I mean, you know, we talked about those cases a lot over the 2 or 3 years we investigated both, you know, each one of them, and we asked ourselves, did we miss anything on 38 Studios? When, you know, obviously, you know, we pulled apart the finance backgrounds of all of those cases. You know, I felt like we knew more about Gordon Fox's finances than Gordon Fox did at some point. But in every one of those instances, when we asked ourselves that question, you know, what if anything did we miss? We found that we hadn't missed anything. I think 38 Studios, you know, we talked about it yesterday, is this tremendous albatross, this tremendous millstone around the state's neck, and understandably so. I get why people are frustrated about it. I'm frustrated about it. You know, I think the frustration stems from, you know, and I saw this a lot over my 20-year law enforcement career, when we don't make really good decisions, when we make stupid decisions, frankly, that turn out to be stupid decisions. And there's no price for anyone to pay other than the taxpayers, people get really upset, and I totally understand that.
Yeah, and they have trouble moving forward.
They do, and we are. And
you say that you're going to, I don't know, reinvest some time and energy in trying to put some kind of executive summary on 38 Studios.
Yeah.
When and if you, so think about the timing now.
Yeah.
Here we are in the fall of 17. You don't take office, if you win this office, until January of 19.
Right.
You think there'll still be a need and appetite for some kind of revised disposition from the Attorney General's office?
Well, I think I'll have that appetite, you know, unless everything comes out in a way that doesn't seem likely, and even if it did come out, the public is satisfied. If that happens, well, then there won't be a need for it, obviously. But I think if the state of play is then what it is today, what I would do, and I did this when I was U.S. Attorney. Like, when you start a job like U.S. Attorney, when you start a job as Attorney General, it's not like all your cases are brand new the day you walk in the door. You inherit some things that you have to make decisions on, and that happened to me as U.S. Attorney. And so what I would do as Attorney General is what I did there, which was, let's see what we got. And we had some big cases when I became U.S. Attorney. I would just want to satisfy myself, really from two angles. The first is, you know, as the investigation was done, you know, and I know something about what they did because I was in contact with Stephen O'Donnell and the state police a lot, and certainly I met with the Attorney General, you know, on a regular basis about all kinds of things, including Gallison, including Fox. So I knew in a general sense what they were doing, but I haven't seen the specifics. I haven't seen the grand jury materials. I haven't seen if there was testimony, any of that testimony myself. I'd want to take a look at that myself, and with really a top person.
Do you support the legislation that was passed that calls for the release of everything?
I think there should be as much transparency as possible.
Do you think Kilmartin has done the right thing in looking to have the court step in the way of that?
Well, I think what the Attorney General said, if you take him at his word, is that he wants the court to decide what can and can't be turned over. Let me say this about the legislation. It is unusual, right? It's unusual to have a bill passed for a specific case to turn over specific information.
For a task.
Essentially, right?
It calls for a task to be done.
Right, in a specific case, right? So I think the court's going to have to rule on that. There's no way that that can happen without a court getting involved.
The court will have to rule on the new. There's a stay now, based on what the governor was asking for. Now the legislation kind of supplants that, but you think that there'll be another stay as the court reviews the legislation as to its constitutionality or legality?
As it interfaces with Rule 6 of the court rules, right? It may be a separation of powers issue, right?
And Rule 6 quickly is what?
Is it's the rule that's passed by the court home. It's a court rule that governs the grand jury, and it governs grand jury confidentiality. In fact, it's a crime to violate it, right? For anyone to violate it, the prosecutor, the witnesses, not the witnesses. The
witnesses can say anything they want about
it's
a
the grand
jury.
jurors, the grand jurors, the court reporter.
Right.
So maybe a separation of powers issue, right? Because the legislature is telling the court, they're getting into a sphere that the court is really involved in. So I think this is really complicated, and I think this is why, my starting position is there should be as much transparency as possible, but what would be I think a good thing here is if the parties, meaning the governor and the attorney general, could agree on as much material as possible and present that to the court as something that they agree on, and then fight over whatever is left that they don't agree on. But it seems to me that the positions are pretty polarized, and the court's just going to have to sort it out.
Well, and we'll talk about the superintendent of the state police and the attorney general in a second. I asked you a question yesterday. I thought you were fairly candid in response. I'll ask it for this audience. Are you as disgusted as I am that the attorney general now never recused himself from this case, given that he had voted on this legislation?
Yeah, well, again, that's a decision that the attorney general himself has to make. All I can tell you is that when I was U.S. attorney, we had a light trigger when it came to recusals. I was recused from every case that involved Blue Cross because my then sister-in-law, now former sister-in-law, worked there, and if Blue Cross was a potential victim, not a target, a potential victim, I was recused. I think whoever has to make that decision has to take into account two things, and it's pretty well known, right? Which is there a conflict? And even if there isn't, is there an appearance of conflict? And we had a light trigger on that, and I think that builds public confidence.
And it was probably the biggest sticking point I ever had with Stephen O'Donnell, who I thought did a wonderful job as superintendent of the state police. I'm guessing you concur.
Oh, I do. Yeah, I do.
But he and I mean, he gave Kilmartin cover on that, he and I had a good battle here over the whole thing. I mean, reasonable people can disagree, but that I think left a festering sore. In addition to the governor's promise in the campaign for an independent investigation and not putting through, and the legislature itself taking responsibility, having its own kind of hearings for what it did to itself and the people.
Right.
And so, criminality aside, you still think there's enough there to repackage and re-explain?
Well, I do think, and this isn't just in the context of 38 Studios, because when you play this out, right, let's assume all the information gets out. Well, who interprets it? Who explains it?
That's why I wanted an independent counsel, not necessarily to bust people, but to explain the story.
Right. Well, the problem here, one potential problem with an independent counsel is if you don't give them the authority, like Bob Mueller, for example, is an independent counsel who has all the powers of a prosecutor. You can use a grand jury, you can immunize folks. If you do a special investigation without that power, what can they really get in the end? So whether it's a special investigator or it's the prosecutor, I think there is room across the system, in 38 Studios and in many other places, some of which we talked about yesterday, for someone who's done a review to explain what happened and make recommendations about how these things can be prevented from happening.
All right. When we come back, we'll talk about the state police. They're in a kind of a funky zone right now, and why this guy really wants this gig. Stay with us. There's Governor Raimondo swearing in the new superintendent, who's now been around for a year, Anna Sumpico. She and the Attorney General currently aren't getting along very well. Part of it's this 38 Studios thing. Part of it might be the politics of the day, where Peter Kilmartin is rumored to be thinking about running for governor. That doesn't please the governor. Thought on that? I think you kind of talked about wanting to tighten the relationship.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a thought about a lot of what you said, but I do have a thought on this, right? That the AG and the AG.
I don't give many responses like that. I'm not going to concede it's a dumb question, but I know exactly what you mean.
You're asking.
I don't need to. You
assume facts, not in evidence. You ask compound questions. You do all those things.
Your
Honor! If we were in the courtroom, we'd be objecting, right? No, I didn't. I'm not assuming that fact. Let me say this. Look, the Attorney General Kamard and I did a lot of good work together. Colonel O'Donnell and I did a lot of good work together. A lot of the good work that we did together in a lot of cases came because we worked well together. We had a good relationship with the state police. In particular, I had a good relationship, a good working relationship with the Attorney General. And so we were able to do cases like Moreau, like Allison, like Fox.
Central Falls,
Central
Galveston,
Falls.
Bristol's,
Right.
the Rep, Fox.
Right. We were able to do those cases because of the good relationship. If that relationship breaks down, if there's no trust, if you're not on the same page, it's very hard to move those investigations forward. And those investigations, obviously, Dan, are incredibly important to the people of Rhode Island.
Just so everybody understands, as the FBI is to the former job that you had, the U.S. Attorney's Office, the state police is to the Attorney General. It's very strange right now. Since the exit of Colonel O'Donnell and the entrance of Colonel Asumpico, we get nothing out of the state police anymore. They don't speak. She hardly says a word publicly. I think it's damaging the great reputation of the state police. I mean, I've always thought that they were the last bus of integrity. Not a perfect organization, no human group is. Do you have a thought on that? I mean, the tight-lippedness that now is the culture and of the state police, I think is incredibly harmful.
I haven't. I've been gone for over 7 months, and I overlap with Colonel Asumpico, really only for a relatively short period of time. I don't. Time goes by, and I don't.
But as AG, are you going to encourage a different dynamic?
Well, sure. I mean, look. As AG, the first thing you do is sit with. I mean, there are some key players you got to sit with. If the state police aren't at the top of the list, I don't know who is.
But they report to the governor, really.
They do. But look. Here's from where I sit. I think the state police. I think the state police need to act as an independent law enforcement agency, and I think all governors that I've known, including Governor Raimondo, believe that the state police have to act as an independent, fair and impartial, non-political law enforcement agency. And and look, the Attorney General, as we talked about, runs from a political party. They have to be apolitical when they get in there too. When it comes time to do the people's business, they have to do it apolitically. They have to have a great relationship, and they have to work together. If they don't, they're not going to get the case.
And they got to be communicative.
Absolutely.
And this culture is very strange. We'll wait as you get into it. Maybe you'll have a different reflection on it. I only have 30 seconds here. Why is it in your gut? Why is it in your gut to want to be the Attorney General?
Because I love the work, and I know the work matters. I mean, and it's not just the big cases. We talk a lot on these shows about the big cases. I think of the $5,000 we got back for a young person who gave all of her savings to one of those IRS tax fraud schemes. They call you up and you got to pay the IRS right now. Those are the cases that matter. That's the work I want to do.
All right. We'll hopefully see you often on the trail. Good luck.
Thank you.
We'll see if this field gets competitive or whether this is a walk. Who knows what the politics will be. But thanks for coming. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Dan.
Former U.S. Attorney Peter Neronha running for Attorney General in 2018. Final word next. Education is always in the forefront of our conversations, and we'll have a visit from the new president of CCRI. Of course, it's been in the news in all sorts of ways, including free tuition. It was the only place that Gina Raimondo was able to execute her free tuition plan. But there's a lot going on with our community college, and a lot to be proud of when it comes to our community college, too. So we'll be talking about those issues tomorrow night here on The State of Mind. See you on the radio at 3 on WPRO. Thanks for tuning in. Good night.